There was a strange tension in the air as Prince Harry stepped onto the set of Real Time with Bill Maher. This wasn't the warm embrace of a morning talk show or a carefully curated documentary sit-down. The moment he shook Maher's hand, it was clear this wasn't going to be a soft conversation. The crowd offered polite applause, but even that felt hesitant, almost wary of what might unfold. Bill Maher, never one to hold back, greeted Harry with a subtle smirk, not hostile, but unmistakably skeptical. "So," Maher opened dryly, "you've had quite the American tour since quitting the royal job, huh?" The audience chuckled. Prince Harry replied with the poise of someone trained in diplomacy, "It's been a journey of growth. One where I'm finally able to use my voice and purpose freely." Maher raised an eyebrow. "Your voice, huh? That voice comes with some pretty impressive contracts. Netflix, Spotify books. So, is it growth or just good PR?" It was a jab Harry wasn't ready for this early. He took a breath, steadied himself. "I'm not here to talk about money. I'm here to talk about healing." The word seemed to hang in the air a moment too long. "Healing," Maher repeated with a shrug. "From a life of palaces, armed security, and generational wealth. Must be tough." Laughter rippled through the audience again, sharper this time. Harry tried to pivot, discussing mental health, the pressure of growing up royal, and the media frenzy that followed him and Meghan. But Maher wasn't buying it wholesale. "You say the media invaded your life," he countered, "yet you've done more interviews in the last 2 years than most celebrities do in a decade. Doesn't that seem contradictory?" That struck a nerve. Harry's tone stiffened. "There's a difference between controlling your own narrative and having it dictated to you. Sharing my story isn't exploitation. It's taking back power." "But you're not just sharing it," Maher shot back. "You're packaging it, selling it, turning it into a brand. Mental health, racism, royal dysfunction. It's all very noble until you put a price tag on it." You could feel the tension coil tighter. Harry began to defend his family, his wife, and the choices they made to leave the institution. He spoke of the mental toll, the lack of support, and how their exit was for survival. But Maher wasn't letting him frame himself as a revolutionary without a challenge. "Survival?" he repeated. "You're still royalty in every tabloid. Your mansion's got a better view than the White House, and the publicists behind your Netflix doc are top tier. Is this survival or strategy?" At that moment, something shifted. Harry's polished tone cracked slightly. "What would you know about what my wife went through?" he snapped. "Or what it feels like to have your child compared to a chimpanzee by the media?" Maher didn't flinch. "I'm not saying it wasn't cruel, but you chose to turn that pain into content. And when people question it, you act like it's betrayal instead of curiosity." The crowd fell silent. This wasn't just banter anymore. It was raw, unfiltered disagreement. The prince's expression hardened, his body language visibly withdrawing. He stared at Maher for a long beat, then stood up slowly. "This isn't a conversation anymore," Harry said coldly. "It's just an attack." Bill leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. "Sometimes the truth feels like an attack when you've built a life around avoiding it." And just like that, Prince Harry walked off the set. No final words, no smile, no handshake. The cameras kept rolling, but the show was effectively over. Within hours, clips of the walkout exploded across the internet. Fans rushed to defend Harry. Critics praised Maher for asking what many were thinking. And everyone else? They were glued to the drama. But now it's your turn. Was this confrontation overdue or over the line? Hit that like button if you think Maher was just keeping it real, and subscribe if you're here for unfiltered truth and the moments publicists wish they could delete. We've got more twists ahead, and trust me, you won't want to miss. The very moment Prince Harry walked off the real-time set, the media universe exploded. The footage, raw, unedited, spread like wildfire across social platforms. Within hours, it wasn't just the top headline on entertainment outlets. It was breaking into international news cycles. It wasn't just a celebrity moment, it was a royal one. And the world wasn't going to let it slide quietly. From London to Los Angeles, royal commentators were immediately summoned to weigh in. The UK tabloids, predictably brutal, called it the Maher mauling. British anchors aired slow-motion replays of the exact second Harry's face twisted from polite to furious. Piers Morgan, unsurprisingly, dedicated an entire segment to the public unmasking of the woke prince. But it wasn't just the usual critics. Even sympathetic voices began to ask, had Harry finally cracked under the pressure of his own narrative? Meanwhile, the American media was split. Some saw Maher as cruel, a comedian turned commentator punching down at a trauma survivor. Others viewed him as a truth-teller, someone finally saying what many feared to, that Harry and Meghan's media strategy had become indistinguishable from the machinery they once condemned. Back in Montecito, the mood was anything but calm. According to sources close to the couple, Meghan was stunned by how quickly it all spiraled. She hadn't accompanied Harry to the studio, but had reviewed talking points and key phrases with him beforehand. The message was meant to be about resilience, mental health, and dignity. Instead, the world saw a man visibly shaken, unable or unwilling to defend himself without lashing out. Behind closed doors, PR damage control was in full swing. Their team scrambled to reframe the narrative. Some insiders reportedly floated the idea of releasing a follow-up video or statement clarifying Harry's position. But that suggestion was quickly shelved. Why? Because any further reaction risked prolonging a moment they desperately wanted to bury. And yet, the palace wasn't silent either. Though official Buckingham sources gave their usual no comment, royal watchers noted a curious surge in public appearances by senior royals in the days that followed. Prince William and Catherine made a surprise visit to a mental health charity in Wales, smiling, calm, and measured. It didn't take a PR expert to see the contrast, stoicism versus spectacle. But perhaps the most surprising reaction came from Hollywood itself. Several A-listers who once lent vocal support to Harry and Meghan were suddenly quiet. Invitations paused, scheduled appearances delayed. The Maher clash seemed to mark a turning point, not because of what was said, but because of what it revealed. A prince still struggling to define himself outside the palace walls, and a public growing weary of the contradictions. In the days following the episode, Harry reportedly turned inward. Sources close to the Sussexes suggested he was deeply rattled, not just by the criticism, but by the feeling that, for once, the public wasn't rallying to his side. The protective bubble that once insulated them, the sympathy after the Oprah interview, the glowing Netflix documentary, was starting to thin. Some even whispered that Harry began questioning whether the media tour had gone too far. That maybe, in the quest to tell his truth, he had become trapped in a cycle of confession and backlash. The irony was cruel. In leaving the monarchy to reclaim his voice, he had entered an even harsher court, one ruled not by tradition, but by public opinion, algorithms, and relentless content cycles. By the end of the week, the clip of him storming off Maher's show had racked up tens of millions of views. Think pieces filled timelines. Late-night hosts cracked jokes. And YouTube channels, yes, even this one, dug into every angle, every frame. But let's pause here and ask the real question. Was this Harry's lowest public moment, or the beginning of a reckoning he needed? In the wake of Prince Harry's dramatic exit from real time with Bill Maher, the polished exterior he had worked so hard to maintain began to show cracks. The fallout wasn't just public, it was profoundly personal. And it wasn't just his critics watching, it was his inner circle, his family, and perhaps most devastatingly, his own conscience. Once back home in Montecito, Harry was reportedly silent for hours. Gone was the passionate, flustered man who defended himself on live television. What remained, according to insiders close to the Sussex Circle, was someone stunned by the gravity of what had just occurred. Not just embarrassed, deeply rattled, and not just by Bill Maher's sharp tongue, but by the reaction that followed. There was no warm public support this time, no trending hashtags of sympathy, no celebrities rushing to Harry's defense, just millions of viewers, thousands of tweets, and headlines around the world echoing the same sentiment. Had Prince Harry finally overplayed his hand? Meghan Markle was reportedly the first to acknowledge the danger. She knew from her Hollywood background how quickly narratives shift in the public eye. In an industry built on image, a single bad moment can cost you not just attention, but access. She understood that Harry's reaction wasn't just a PR stumble, it was a rupture in the persona they had carefully crafted for years. Privately, Meghan began to recalibrate. Friends close to her said she was in strategy mode, canceling scheduled calls and quietly reaching out to high-profile advisors. The couple's media team was instructed to pause all upcoming appearances, review past clips, and reframe future messaging. Their empire, built on authenticity and truth-telling, was suddenly being questioned for its selective transparency and emotional volatility. But Meghan wasn't just managing the optics. She was also reportedly trying to manage Harry himself, who was now facing a personal reckoning. Those closest to him say he began to withdraw, not into anger, but into reflection. For the first time, there was real discussion about whether the constant public platforming of their lives was doing more harm than good. Sources even hinted at the unthinkable: a temporary break from media engagements and possibly a move toward behind-the-scenes activism, away from cameras and controversy. Harry had reached a breaking point, and while some inside the Sussex Circle urged him to push forward, Meghan, pragmatic as ever, understood the importance of retreat before a rebuild. Meanwhile, in royal corridors far from California, word of the Maher debacle reached ears that have long been skeptical of Harry's choices. Though Buckingham Palace never comments on media interviews, multiple outlets noted the subtle shift in tone during official engagements. Prince William, delivering a speech just days later, spoke pointedly about the importance of responsibility when one has a platform. Was it a coincidence? Perhaps, or perhaps not. Back in the States, a quiet pause began to take shape. No social posts from the Sussexes, no cheerful podcast soundbites. Instead, Meghan was said to be working privately on a new charitable initiative, one that would focus less on storytelling and more on results. A deliberate pivot, maybe even a rebrand. But let's be clear, this wasn't the end of their story. If anything, it was a hard reset, a moment of clarity forged in controversy. Harry, for all his vulnerabilities, had touched a nerve in the public. People weren't just reacting to the Maher moment, they were responding to years of conflicting signals. And now, whether by design or necessity, change was coming. What remains to be seen is how Harry and Meghan will respond to this internal crisis. Will they return stronger, more grounded? Or will the damage prove more lasting than they anticipated? One thing's for sure, if this chapter proved anything, it's that even modern royalty isn't immune to public reckoning. And if you're still here, reading, watching, listening, you clearly care about the bigger story. So do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment on where you stand in all this, and share your thoughts. Was this Harry's breaking point or a step toward redemption? After the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines began to cool, a quieter but far more profound shift began to take hold, one that could change the Sussex place in both royal and Hollywood circles forever. Let's begin in London. Inside the royal institution, known for its unshakable silence and behind-the-scenes strategy, the reaction to Prince Harry's real-time debacle was said to be a mixture of grim satisfaction and strategic concern. According to insiders, there were no public statements, but plenty of raised eyebrows. One senior aide reportedly described the incident as inevitable, citing years of Harry's escalating media dependency. But behind closed doors, conversations grew sharper. Advisors to Prince William and King Charles were said to be reevaluating any future attempts at reconciliation. The fear wasn't just emotional, it was reputational. If Harry, under pressure, could so publicly unravel, what guarantee was there he wouldn't do it again, perhaps with even more explosive consequences? And then, across the Atlantic, the reaction from Hollywood was even colder. In an industry that thrives on control, brand management, and the illusion of stability, Harry's on-air meltdown rang alarm bells. Agents, producers, and studio executives began distancing themselves, not overtly, but subtly. Scheduled meetings were postponed. Invitations slowed. Even close allies, people who once championed the couple's authenticity, started questioning their judgment. The entertainment world may celebrate disruption, but it loathes unpredictability. And Prince Harry, once a fresh voice in the media landscape, was starting to look less like a changemaker and more like a liability. Reports surfaced that Netflix, while publicly supportive, began tightening reins on creative control regarding future Sussex-related content. Spotify, still bruised from its fallout with Meghan's podcast deal, was completely silent. And perhaps most tellingly, Oprah Winfrey herself, once the couple's most powerful ally, chose not to comment at all. Why does that matter? Because in Hollywood, silence speaks volumes. Oprah's quiet distance sent a clear message. Whatever credibility the Sussex once held in elite circles was now in question. And in an industry where relationships are everything, that kind of doubt can be career-ending. Meghan, sensing the tide turning, made a calculated move. She began re-engaging with grassroots charitable work, appearing at lower-profile but meaningful events. The flashy Instagram posts stopped. No podcast teases. No magazine covers. It was a return to the kind of humanitarian work that first made her a public figure, a shift from performance to purpose. Harry, meanwhile, was said to be undergoing a personal transformation of his own. Sources close to the couple said he began working with a new team of advisors, less Hollywood, more global impact. He stepped back from scheduled appearances. The tone of their internal discussions shifted from influence to relevance. Because here's the truth: influence can be bought, spun, even faked. But relevance? That's earned. And after the Maher incident, Harry had to fight to earn it back. And it wasn't just about public perception. The couple faced real financial questions. With growing operational costs for their nonprofit, security details, and lifestyle, new income streams would be essential. But the usual routes, book deals, streaming contracts, brand partnerships, now came with risk. Would brands align with a couple perceived as unstable? Would platforms trust them with another major production? Only time would tell. But despite the storm, one thing remained clear: the world hadn't stopped watching. If anything, interest in Harry and Meghan was at a new high, not because of their message, but because of their missteps. In a media landscape fueled by outrage and redemption, the Sussexes stood at a crossroads. Would they fade into irrelevance, or could they find a way to rebuild not just their image, but their purpose? And that's the cliffhanger where we leave this story, for now. If you've made it this far, you're clearly one of the few who doesn't just scroll past the surface. You're the kind of viewer who craves real insight, layered narrative, and yes, some drama with depth. So don't just watch from the sidelines. Subscribe now, drop a comment on where you think this saga is heading, and let's keep this conversation going. Because with Harry and Meghan, the story is never really over. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and stay tuned.